Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Preparing for Reentry session, which is a collaboration with the CCRI Veterans Office and the VA Medical Center. Today, we have Timothy Carroll and Jennifer Oswald, who are Clinical Psychology Postdoctoral Fellows at the VA Medical Center in the Post-Deployment and Readjustment Clinic. This is our third session that we've done, and the first two were really wonderful and so helpful. So we're very happy to have them back today to talk about something that I think we all need, sort of returning to some sense of normalcy, being back in the office, being back on campus, going from isolation to socializing again, what that looks like. And really, we're going to cover quite a bit, not just what it looks like to come back, but time management, how to adjust your schedule again, commuting, leaving pets, juggling kids, the anxiety, some of the social anxiety, some of the social skills that we need to redevelop. So we're excited to have this session, and feel free to share any comments you have in the chat, either privately or with everyone, or raise your hand if you have any questions throughout. We'll be stopping here and there to check in if anyone has any comments. And with that, I will send it over to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Micaela, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone watching and listening today for being here. We are very happy to be back and working with the student veteran group again. Micaela introduced us very well. I'm Jennifer Oswald, and my fellow postdoc, Dr. Timothy Carroll, will be presenting today on a number of different topics. And we just wanted to, before we jump into that, give a thank you to Micaela, Rob, Patrick, and Tara, to this group that helped to kind of invite us here and coordinate this so that we could be here working with you all today. Timothy and I, in putting together this presentation, decided to address some of the kind of general anxieties that people are feeling right now, going back into, a new stage of pandemic, post-pandemic sort of life right now in this ever-changing landscape. We weren't able to make slides to address every single topic of interest that was sent our way, but that said, we tried to leave plenty of time and space in the presentation for discussion throughout. So if you had a particular question or topic that you don't see addressed directly on the slides here, we definitely invite you to ask us directly or send an ask to Micaela for her to share with us so that we can address everyone's concerns. So with that said, I will turn it over to Timothy to get started here.
So where do we begin, y'all? When Pat sent out surveys to kind of check the temperature on topics that might be helpful to talk about today, as we've kind of alluded to, it became really clear to us that there's a lot going on, right, for all of us. And being back in person, not being back in person, anxiety, managing change, managing time, managing changing time, isolation, it's a lot. And so it's no wonder that we hear so many stories, right, from the veterans we work with, from the folks we work with, talking about feeling weary, lost, frustrated, or really just kind of feeling disoriented. And of course we do. Of course we do. Disorientation, right? And I wanted to begin here at the very beginning of this presentation, and maybe here at the very beginning of yet another semester, where we have to go through things such as school orientations, but to talk about how we might move from disorientation to being oriented. And as many of you know better than me, the first step, it turns out, in orienteering is to locate your position. It's like, a map does you no good if you can't locate where you are. So the first step in orienteering is identifying where you are, and it's no different when it comes to our internal world. You see, in the midst of overwhelm, the only place that we can really ground ourselves is in this moment, right? If we've learned anything over the past year and a half, it's that we can't predict or control the next wave that life might hit us with, or even control the stuff that's already happened, like it's already done, right? In matters of orientation, we have to locate ourselves, and we have to start here and now. One way of practicing this orienting, right, that I keep talking about, is through the practice of mindfulness. So I'm going to invite you here at the very beginning, and consider this. If not now, this might be weird to jump straight in, but if not now, then when? When are you going to try something like this? And I invite you right now to take a moment to check in with yourself, to orient yourself, right, to the terrain of your life. And so what I'm going to do, just briefly, this won't last long. You can turn your cameras off if you'd like. To first kind of get comfortable and anchored in your physical body right here, right now. Relaxed, but still alert. And allow your eyes to close if you're comfortable with that, or you can fix them on a point in front of you. You can soften your gaze a little bit. Take a couple of gentle breaths in and out. Notice the sensation of your own breath as you breathe in and out. Now, try to imagine that you're lying in a completely safe and comfortable place where you could look up and see the sky, and you're just watching the clouds pass by. Start to notice your thoughts and feelings. Each time a thought or feeling pops into your head, I want you to imagine placing it on one of these clouds and allowing it to float by. These thoughts and feelings, they can be pleasant or unpleasant. What are you nervous about today? Maybe this is unpleasant. Where do you feel peace today? The goal here is to continue watching the sky and allow the clouds to keep moving by, putting one after the other, any thought, any feeling on a cloud, and watching it float. Notice any urges or sensations in response to your thoughts. What do they make me want to do? But rather than following through with a response or answering that urge, just notice the urge is there. Try not to change what shows up on the clouds in any way. If the clouds disappear or you get distracted, that's normal and exactly what our minds do. Right? Notice this happening, the distraction, and then gently bring yourself back to watching the sky. You might have the thought, I don't know if I'm doing this right, man, or this is super weird. Perfect. Place those thoughts on a cloud. You're just observing, witnessing. Do that for just another couple of moments. And finally, bring your attention back to your breathing. Just notice the rhythm of the in and out of your breath. It's with you all the time, it turns out. It's always right here. And then bring your awareness back to wherever you are, and you can kind of gently open your eyes. If you want to have your camera back on, you can turn it back on. It's your choice. is anyone willing to share what that was like? What they noticed?
Patrick, yeah.
So I'm just gonna go off like personal experiences. Like I've actually been doing this for about 2 years now.
Yeah.
And honestly, like it's something that needs to get worked on like a daily basis. And I mean I count. So if I get in something that kind of like sets me off like that and I just find myself going around in circles in my head about a certain situation, I'll just count and just focus on kind of like what you said with the clouds and focus on just that. But I mean, no offense, it sounds dumb, but it's like practicing it, like all of a sudden it kind of just clicks in a way. So I've noticed like fairly recently, it's I'll be like going through like those same patterns, and then all of a sudden like, dude, like, what are you doing? And then for some reason I can somewhat kind of just assess the situation, just be done with it. So it does sound kind of foo-foo, but it does work if you put in the effort, I guess. Sorry for the language, I guess.
No. No, I'm actually thankful that you brought that up, and that, yeah, like there's this resistance we might have to entering into a practice like this, and yet what you're describing, regardless of how you get there, and there's apps, and we'll talk about those, and there's a lot of different ways of doing this, but ultimately the thread that you're speaking to, Patrick, is this idea of bringing our attention to something that is typically automatic. You said, I just get in these patterns, right? And I'm just going. Maybe I'm ruminating, or maybe I feel like I have to be, like, whatever it is. And we're just kind of operating from that place, as opposed to bringing a different kind of relationship to our experience, which is intention and awareness. Any other thoughts? I didn't see if there was anything in the chat.
Tim, I'll add to what Patrick said, that I practice this as well. And it does sound like woo-woo and foo-foo, and it's a hard sell sometimes with our vets, but I feel like for me what it does is almost creates like a buffer between me and the stress. So the stress of life is still there, but maybe the reaction is different because there's just this barrier between it when this is part of your daily routine.
Wait, you're saying that when you do something like this, all of your problems don't go away?
Not exactly.
Right.
I'm waiting for that.
Yeah, that'd be nice. No, but yeah, beautiful point. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't change anything about the reality of the stressors, of the challenges that we face in our everyday life. And yet, like you said, it brings a different kind of relationship, a buffer. And it turns out I'm going to talk a little bit about that, between us and our experience. It changes it up a little bit.
I know one thing that I always notice when I do these sorts of exercises is just on a really basic level, I'm not breathing very much. I think for me, that's a way that when I'm absorbed or when I'm, preoccupied or distressed, I, kind of hold my breath a little. And even at the most basic level, it's like, well, there's a very simple problem with a very simple solution, right? Take a deep breath, right? Take another breath, and just checking in with what my body needs, even if it doesn't make the other problems go away. It is just such a great way to kind of anchor on that really basic level.
I like it as an anchor. I've heard that language used before, but for the first time only like a couple of years ago, this idea of our breath being an anchor to the moment. And when you talk about feeling chaotic, when you talk about feeling overwhelmed, it matters to have an anchor. It matters to have something to be secure in. So yeah, we'll jump to the next slide. And so what we're talking about is mindfulness, right? And it's this, again, this act of bringing attention or awareness to our internal and external experiences in a non-judgmental way. So, but this seemingly simple act has been shown to have like a really serious and profound impact on well-being, and it's backed by some really cool scientific support. And so, of course, you've got the psychologists here, and we're going to want to talk about that a little bit. But one way mindfulness has been shown to be helpful is that it can enhance the way we respond to challenges. And so Micaela was kind of speaking to this, and it can actually impact our willingness to look beyond ourselves. So, and there's many studies that we could point to, but I found this recent experiment really cool that I was going to highlight. Is this guy, Dr. Hirschberg, and his colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, and they had people trained in these different mindfulness practices. And after folks were trained, they then had to submerge their arms in ice cold water for several minutes while being observed, right? And at the end, they asked people like how they felt. They had asked them before too. And they invited them to also volunteer some time, even beyond what they originally signed up for. And what they found was that certain mindfulness practices, including a practice of a 12-minute practice and being aware of their breath, resulted in folks like kind of finding the stressor less aversive than other groups. And when they asked people to volunteer, this group was among the people who were more likely to help out. And so studies like this are adding to the evidence that suggests that these types of practices, bringing intention and awareness to what's going on with us and our body, internally and externally, can increase our ability, I like what Micaela said, to buffer against or withstand stressors, to have less difficult reactions when stressors do occur, and even kind of promote helping behaviors. So get this, and this is one of the things I'd love for you to be able to take away, that rather than trying to ignore, right, or stay busy, or telling ourselves that this isn't comfortable and I'm okay, or that this isn't cold, as in the case of the study, or that this re-entry isn't hard, or whatever the case may be, even something as simple as being aware of our own breath and what's happening for us physiologically in our body might help us navigate these challenges more effectively. It can also, I point to another study here, they can help us, Judson Brewer and his colleagues, they can help us understand unhelpful patterns and habits. So this is what Patrick spoke to. And this group of researchers talk about anxiety and the way we respond to it as a habit that can be hacked. I like that. A habit that can be hacked. And it's really super cool. They've done a lot of work with things like smoking, and they took this really strange approach, this really weird foo-foo, I think that's a word that's been used, approach, right? And rather than saying don't smoke, rather than telling people that smoking is bad, that's a novel idea. Nobody knows that, right? Rather than telling people not to smoke, they said smoke, please smoke, do it. But do it with curiosity. And they were given some training around this, of course. And here's the deal. It turns out that we're much more likely to automatically, right? Patrick was saying that, automatically go to our habits like smoking or isolating or even yelling at people we love, or whatever the case may be, the habits that we have. We're much more likely to go to those automatically when we're stressed out, even though we know better. But when we actually bring our awareness and curiosity, mindfulness is what we're talking about, right, to the moment, we can respond from a place of intention. So we're kind of like seeing the nitty-gritty of our habits, right? Like helps us understand them on a deeper level, to know what we really want. So we don't have to force ourselves, goodness, to not do something like smoking. We can choose to do something else, to do something different. So rather than running from, trying to prevent, we're running towards something more meaningful. And that is what mindfulness is all about. It offers, these are the building blocks. And this is an introduction, of course. but it offers a way, like even if you can just catch a glimpse of that from your own experience today, it offers a way to get oriented, that's where we started, to what we want and don't want. By being aware of what we're doing rather than being in autopilot. And so by using mindfulness, folks in these studies and Dr. Brewer's studies, we're able to naturally let go of the habit easier, it turns out. Better than education, better than other like evidence-supported approaches. And Brewer talks about people saying things like, wow, like this cigarette really tastes bad. I don't actually like it. Like when rather than it just being something that I do out of habit, it opens us up to making meaningful choices in the here and now. And look, this isn't a presentation about winning a competition, right? Like of holding your hand in water, or even about smoking for that matter. But these are examples that illustrate how mindfulness provides a foundation for relating to the world in an authentic and intentional way, to really coming into contact with our experience. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about like, hey, how prevalent are these experiences and what we might look for as we're noticing some of these things, and how you might begin to think about your stress in new ways.
Great.
I can also take questions there too. I don't know.
Do we have any questions at this point, Micaela?
I don't have anything in my chat.
Okay, great. All right. So as Timothy mentioned, the mindfulness approaches that he was just discussing are a really great way to check in with ourselves, see what's going on for us internally, and start to figure out where we want to go. But we also wanted to acknowledge that a lot of what's going on right now and maybe influencing why we're noticing these things internally is just because of what a unique and challenging external situation and environment that we are all living through right now in a pretty unique way, right? Everybody experiences stress at various times in their lives, but it's rare that everybody on the planet is going through a stressor kind of all together, and everybody reacting to that all in their different ways. So we really wanted to emphasize that piece, and part of the reason that we were invited to do this presentation today is with that understanding that not just the people who are here right now, but likely pretty much everybody who you might encounter in your day-to-day lives is coping with this pandemic, coping with lots of change, coping with lots of transition, whether that transition is going back to school for the fall semester or any of the many other things that the current circumstances of the world have thrown at us. So we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that part of what makes this so uniquely anxiety provoking is that it is really uncharted territory, right? Most of us, probably all of us, have not had to live through a global pandemic and everything that entails in our lifetimes. This is very new, it is very different. And although we've gone through challenges in the past, we might not have a playbook for getting through these particular challenges, which brings with it its own level of anxiety. And in addition, as we're all kind of seeing right now, even when we started planning this presentation back in the spring, we were hoping, okay, maybe we'd even do this presentation in person. Maybe we'll be at a place where, we're going back totally to normal. And now as we look at the recent updates and news, we know that we're not even quite there yet. So it's really been an ever-changing landscape, an always moving target in terms of what we're having to adjust to. So if you're noticing, wow, usually my anxiety goes away after a while if I kind of sit with it, because that's usually how it works. Why is it so bad now? And that's partly because the situation keeps changing. You're having to constantly adjust and readjust again, and that's a lot. And that's really hard. And acknowledging that and understanding that process can go a long way towards you being able to be compassionate towards yourself and others, and more effective in how you're approaching this stuff, because you understand that, of course, this is going to be rough. how could it be anything else when there's all of this back and forth and up and down associated with it? And know too, I liked this picture of all the different boats in the water, because although we are all going through this challenge together, we are all unique human beings, and each of us is going to be responding to these circumstances in their own unique way. So you'll notice as we go through this presentation that the tips that we offer are very general, very principle driven. We're not going to promise that one single magic trick will cure all of your ills here, right? As Micaela mentioned, it hasn't made all of her problems go away, but understanding that when you're presented with a toolbox of sorts, you can apply the pieces that fit best for you in the way that makes most sense for you to help to navigate your unique challenges. With that said, right, know that I'm not kidding when I say that we are all kind of feeling this right now. I found this in doing some kind of preliminary research for this presentation, that the American Psychological Association, the good old APA, is routinely surveys the adults in the United States to check in on the general stress in America, as they call it. And when they did a poll back in March of this year, which is about a year out from when this became, COVID became declared an official pandemic, they found that just about half of the, I think it was about 3,000 adults that they surveyed, about half of those people said they had some form of uneasiness or hesitance about adjusting to going back to normal, right? To having in-person interactions. And that's a pretty powerful thing, right? It's obviously not a sample of every single person on this earth, but it's pretty indicative when you survey that many people and that large of a proportion of them kind of endorse feeling that way. So part of what can often be so tough about anxiety is thinking that you're alone in that struggle, and therefore feeling really self-conscious if you ask for help or you feel like you're struggling. And that's a common bias that our brains have, to always kind of think that kind of like we have it the worst, and no one else can kind of understand, or they'll think we're weird if we share that we're struggling. And it can be really helpful in breaking down barriers to making change and getting help to understand that I'm not in this alone. A lot of people are, probably able to relate to what I'm going through and would probably be that much more motivated to help. Some additional background information here, right? Wanted to put a name on what we might all be feeling, right? So this anxiety has a particular term that's typically called reentry anxiety, which is this uneasiness about returning to some form of normal life after a person has been immersed for a period of time in a particularly stressful or traumatic environment. We see this pretty commonly in folks who are, perhaps veterans, have been on deployment and they're coming back, and suddenly the civilian world feels so strange and so at odds with their experiences. That's often called reentry anxiety as well. Some of you listening today may have had this experience in a very different context of your life before. It's the same idea here, right? When our body kind of adjusts as best as it's able to an extreme demanding environment, when things get back to normal, it feels weird. It feels different, right? We take time to adjust to things, and we don't deal well with the kind of whiplash of having to switch gears from one thing to the next. If you're wondering, does this apply to me? You might look for some typical signs, which, don't look so different from other types of anxiety concerns, right? You might notice that your brain is moving pretty fast, racing thoughts, more worry, trouble focusing on things. You might notice that your body feels more keyed up than usual. You feel more tense. You feel, the kind of cardiovascular symptoms, breathing too much, not breathing, like I mentioned earlier, some restlessness. You might notice that this has been impacting your sleep. You might be having trouble sleeping, or you might be feeling like you need to sleep too much. And as a result, you might be feeling kind of out of it, tired, fatigued during the day. And of course, that's going to impact your mood in a negative way. One thing that is really a hallmark of this type of anxiety is avoidance, which is staying away at all costs from particular people or situations that can elevate those symptoms. And in the case of reentry anxiety, that might look like interactions with other people. That might look like being in a classroom or in a grocery store or someplace where maybe you haven't been in a while because of the various restrictions, and suddenly you're having to go back into those places, and you might feel the urge to nope, just let me just continue to stay home, continue to keep my distance, because this feels now uncomfortable and strange. And I really want to emphasize that kind of social anxiety piece. Social anxiety can happen in totally on its own, pandemic or no pandemic, people can struggle with these things. But when we have all been on our own or in a, interacting with other people on a much more limited scope, those of us who struggle with social anxiety might notice that it's become even harder than usual. It feels more stressful, takes more effort, wears us out more to interact with other people. And the reason is that usually when we're going out in the world, even if we're a little bit anxious, our circumstances kind of force us to interact with people on a day-to-day basis in little ways like making eye contact, in big ways like having conversations with our teachers or our bosses or our family members that can be difficult. But whether we want to or not, right, usually to hold down a job or be successful in school, we really have to move through these things, and that helps the anxiety to go down over time, right? And when we then give permission to isolate, which this pandemic gave us all, suddenly that anxiety comes back because we haven't been kind of gently exposing and gently confronting that in our day-to-day lives. Okay. So all of these might be reasons why you might be feeling this more than usual. And the last piece of background information I want to give in terms of the, why we're noticing those things that you might have noticed when we did the mindfulness exercise is these emotions are there for a reason. Sometimes this feels counterintuitive. We might feel like something's wrong with us if we're feeling fear, anxiety, anger, sadness, right? Those are unpleasant emotions a lot of the time, and they don't feel comfortable. But they are very much here for a reason, right? When we've studied the human condition and how people have evolved and developed over time, it becomes pretty clear that if we didn't experience these emotions, we would have a lot of trouble in situations that are actually threatening or actually dangerous or that are actually, really important for us to pay attention to or learn from. You can see this little graph of stress levels that we have here where it shows that, if we didn't feel any stress whatsoever, we kind of just laze around and not get anything done. Right. And it's only when we get to kind of an optimum level of stress that we're motivated, we're on top of things, we're striving to move forward and get stuff done. But then, of course, when that stress level gets too high, as with any level of emotion, it starts to get in the way. It starts to wear us out. It starts to distract us. It starts to feel overwhelming, and we might break down or burn out at a certain extent. And the same is true of all emotions, right? Good and bad, that they serve adaptive purposes. In the case of this anxiety we're feeling, right? It's meant to key us into possible threats. At certain points in this pandemic, it's been really useful to feel a little bit anxious because it makes us take precautions. It makes us take things seriously. It makes us think twice about, how much risk we are able to, navigate. And therefore, it served a helpful purpose to us. And now, as we're going back in the world, it's now kind of saying like, hey, this feels different. This feels new. Are you sure about this? And we want to make sure that we're distinguishing from when that's helpful and when it's not so helpful or getting in the way. Okay. These emotions also cause a lot of body changes. Some of you might be familiar with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which is the stuff that your body releases when you're either under acute or chronic stress. And if you're noticing some of those arousal symptoms I mentioned earlier, the breathing, the muscle tension, the agitation, the restlessness, the trouble sleeping, you might even be feeling more queasy than usual or having more gut problems or having more headaches or more or different pain. All of that stuff can come as a result of or get made worse by having more of this stuff going on in your body. So really all of these components come together to make everything just a little more difficult, right? You've got these things kind of working against you. And the last thing I want to mention here is that we are all in different stages of recovering from all of the upheaval and unrest and confusion and uncertainty that the past year and a half has brought for us. And researchers out there, Judith Herman is a trauma researcher who has looked at how people typically recover from these things. And they found that we move through stages and we each move through those in our own time. First, we have to make sure we're safe. We're out of the dangerous situation and we're in safety. Well, that's been a bit of a moving target for us recently. Then we have to take the time to kind of make sense of what we have gone through. We might remember things that have been lost, people that have been lost, experiences, senses of self that have been lost, and make note and kind of mourn and grieve those. And then we have to work on reconnecting to the people in the world around us. And at a large scale, that's where a lot of us are now, trying to re-enter, reconnect. And we might be finding that that's difficult because of all these moving pieces, but it can be helpful to see that as truly a part of this recovery process that's helpful for us to really tackle over time. So I wanted to pause here and take any questions or comments as people, might be reacting to this or noticing different ways that this hits them. So Micaela, if you have things to share, or if others would like to share, now would be a great time.
While we wait for any comments in the chat, before we got started, I was sharing that I've been back in the office in person a couple of weeks now, a few days at a time. And it's been all the things you're describing. And I love it. Like, I was so happy to meet people in person again and like see them instead of just via Zoom or phone call or email. But it was much more tiring than I remember it being. Like, my regular day of seeing however many vets felt tiring. And then Patrick and I were talking about some events that we had on campus at CCRI for like enrollment day, which is, come on in, we'll get you all set up. And those were pretty overwhelming too, to have like an outreach event where people were just coming up and you're answering all the questions. Used to be such a normal part of the job, but now it feels different and a little overwhelming. And again, I enjoy that stuff, but if there's any hesitancy there, I know Patrick, you might want to, you can share what you were saying, that you kind of had to bow out of a few of them.
I think that has a lot more to do with me being like I guess what they call me, I have extroverted tendencies with introvert personality. So I'll be over the top to a point where I burn myself out. So then when I get home, I'm like in the fetal position.
Yeah.
But I think what stresses me out the most about everything, like being back in person, is that, I mean, to be frank, no one knows what the hell they're doing. So it's like you have all these guidelines, like you can't talk to somebody face to face, you can't have so many people in a certain office. And you're trying to, me personally, I'm trying to help all these people, but then it's like now I got to walk on eggshells. I think that is what is draining, is just trying to be able to do the job in an efficient way, but you gotta go through all these extra loopholes now. So that's what makes it frustrating for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're operating under a lot more like pressure, regulations, restrictions. It's a lot to keep track of, right? That's that kind of ever-changing landscape, that moving target piece, where our brains, we're probably all busy people in the best of times, and now the universe has dumped a rule book on our laps to keep track of, in addition to all of the day-to-day things that we have to navigate as workers, students, family members, etc. And it's a lot. It gets overwhelming very quickly, because most of us were not just like twiddling our thumbs, bored, hoping for a nice challenge in 2020 and 2021, right? We were going on with our busy lives, and now this is just piled on top. Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking, and you guys are probably going to touch on something with time management, but there is this element of, I had to sort of recreate my job in this virtual environment, right? Same as students had to recreate their learning environment to be all online. So now I have like one foot in the virtual job and one foot in my in-person version of the job. and I feel like I need more feet because it's hard
Yes.
to be juggling both. And that I've been warning my student vets, like, it's probably going to be weird that you have some classes on campus and some still virtually, hybrid, whatever they are. It's like you're going to have like two student identities in a way.
Yeah, yeah. They in psychology we call that set shifting, right? And you have to go from like one different mindset or rule book or way of thinking about things. Sometimes people, are doing like code switching. I have to be one identity and then another, right? But it's when our brain has to just like, whoop, oh, now I'm in this mode. Oh, now I'm in that mode. And it takes effort, it takes energy, and it makes us have to kind of think on a higher level than we usually do. We can't autopilot in ways that are often helpful, right? When we get into a routine that helps us to be efficient. When we have to set shift, we don't get that luxury, right? It's like when you're driving your car in particularly hectic traffic versus if you're cruising down a country road, right? When you're cruising in the road, you're going to be fine. You might be able to like take a call on your Bluetooth or, fiddle with the radio, and it's fine. You're not going to crash your car. But if suddenly there's a bunch of other cars on the road and the speed is changing and there's stoplights and there's stuff going on, suddenly it's a lot, right? Suddenly it takes much more effort to focus on any one thing. And I think that's what a lot of us are realizing when we have to constantly be switching back and forth in these different modes. Yeah.
And I have a private comment that someone is saying they're not overly outgoing in general, so they feel constantly overwhelmed as soon as they step outside. And I feel like a lot of our vets probably are having that same feeling. And then I think to myself, geez, imagine feeling like that and then showing up on campus with all these people everywhere and expecting to be in a good mindset to learn, right? So
Totally.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. That's a real challenge right now, to have to deal with these things and have all of that kind of internal pressure built up, and to think, wow, in order to just kind of do my job or get my school done, I have to confront that. And when we are definitely going to address some kind of strategies for approaching that, so I won't get into too much detail, but to just validate that is a really tough piece and a very real piece of this. I had a similar a private comment in my chat over here where someone mentioned that their anxiety gets so bad that at times they feel like they kind of black out for a few minutes, which can be a common symptom of anxiety. That not that you lose consciousness, but like your vision goes and you feel like you kind of, maybe dissociate a little bit for a moment, which can feel really scary. Want to kind of validate that that's not uncommon in anxiety, and can benefit from some of the kind of mindfulness exercises that Timothy mentioned, and some other, kind of coping strategies that we will mention later on. But yeah, like when your body is having such a strong reaction to this stuff, it's really tough. It's really tough to go through this, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of work through some ways to A, treat that compassionately, and B, come up with some good strategies to be trying to help.
And we have a question from Rob.
Rob MC.
Yeah, so it's more of a comment than a question. I just wanted to share, like, one thing that was really stressful for me was like with students is, we pick our classes so far in advance for the fall semester. And like when you pick your class, oh, sorry. When you pick your class, you're picking your schedule around like, okay, hang on 1 second, sorry. When you're picking your class, she had a comment too, sorry. When you're picking your classes, you pick your schedule around like your current reality, as far as like things being virtual, and like these are the guidelines, these are the regulations. And then halfway through the summer, everything changes, and we kind of go like, as Micaela was saying, hybrid or some in person, or you go back to work in person. So now that first schedule you originally picked, it's like you have to redo the whole thing again. And now it almost looks like we're going backwards. So it's like, it's just, as far as scheduling, I just think it gets stressful. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
Sorry about the noise from the peanut gallery over there.
No worries. That's been one thing we've all had to navigate too, right? Less control over our environments in this, virtual kind of theater that we're all operating in now. And yeah, absolutely right. The inability to totally predict what things are going to look like very far in advance. I mean, you're talking about, months out, but we're dealing with changes even on a week-to-week basis, on a day-to-day basis. That's a lot. It absolutely is stressful.
And what Rob is
Some of the
talking about
things
has
that
been
will,
happening.
oh,
Sorry, Tim. I was just gonna say what Rob's talking about with the classes, for planning purposes, it's a big deal. Like, when are my classes gonna be? Will I be in person? But then it also
Yes.
affects the student vets with their payments. Like, they have to have a class on campus, and they thought they were all set, and then they go look at their schedule, and the school moved it back online. So
Yeah.
they have to
Yeah.
regroup and look at everything again. It's a lot to again go back to the drawing board and start planning. Well, where am I going to be? What classes will I take? It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. When we talk about the things that are disrupted in the aftermath of going through really stressful life events like this, we talk about a couple of like salient domains. We talk about safety, and we've addressed that. But one of the big areas is like power and control. We talk about like things like esteem. We talk about intimacy. And so what does that mean? Well, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about how we feel about ourselves, the security we have about ourselves. We're talking about whether or not we feel like we have control over our environments. And in an evolving kind of stressful event, which is kind of what we're going through and what Rob was describing, it's hard to find grounding in that. And it strikes me that where we started out today was saying, wow, the pull is so strong to feel like in the absence of having control, it's like I want to grab onto something, so I'm trying to predict, or I'm trying to like get ahead of myself and feel like I have to be able to know what's. And the reality is that when we show up to that, we're able to be curious about that. We're like, well, what's the cost of that? What are the cost of these of being pulled in those directions? Naturally so. We've just established that this is not only natural, but it's common. Like I'm speaking from my own experience in some ways. And what does that pull me away from? Well, it pulls me away from this moment too, where I might otherwise connect with people that I do care about, or find ways or strategies that are meaningful for me. And so I think that's possibly a good segue for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I started switching the slides because as you were saying that, I was thinking, that's a wonderful connection to where we're going next. Right now that we are kind of understanding, noticing where, what's going on with us, understanding why we're feeling that way. Now we get down to the like, okay, so what, right? What can we actually do about this? So I am going to bounce over to Timothy. I think you just started leading us right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was even already kind of talking about that mindfulness, that acceptance piece again. And when we talk about those things, there's a couple of things I just wanted to point out really quickly, that what we're not talking about with acceptance or something like that is some kind of resignation or like throwing our hands up or distancing from our experience. I guess it is what it is. I'll just passively accept. We're actually promoting, as you may be picking up here, an active engagement with your experience. And some people have described like anything that we might go through that's stressful or uncomfortable in life as a rip tide or a rip current, right? And that to swim against the reality of our experience is a hopeless task, it turns out. We lose at that game, right? It's like telling ourselves to not have urges to smoke when that's what we've been doing, right? Or telling ourselves to not have an emotion like anger or frustration or fear or whatever it is. Jen just mapped out like how natural that is. Come on, right? Like, but to be curious about those experiences, to tune in with the true currents, right? We're talking about rip tides of our lives, opens up a different path forward. And to get through a rip current, you may know this, right? You actually have to swim with it. You have to be in it. You swim diagonally, right? But you're in the midst of it. You go with it, right? And we have to be willing to engage with what we're experiencing. And so the question becomes like, well, what will that do for me? And that's a good question, because once we are, again, bringing our awareness to our experience without being reactive or dictated by that experience, we have choice, and we're no longer responding automatically, but there's a space and flexibility in that awareness and gives us more choice. And so that's what we're arriving at, is choice and an opportunity to do something different. I guess get asked a lot, well, then what do I do, right? These natural questions. What do I do? What do I choose? What direction do I go? And we'll get into that in the next slide. I do see some questions as well. Okay. Yeah, so what do I do? It's often helpful, it turns out, to move in the direction of what matters to you, your values, the things that make life worth living, the stuff that we were kind of I was alluding to earlier. And when we talk about values, you can see they're the things that give us meaning and purpose. They serve as a compass in a way that we can always orient toward what matters. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of guidance on how you might clarify your values, and you might already be pretty clear about that. But and for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into a full exercise. But one way that you may even consider on your own time, or even right now, kind of doing the thought experiment, is like imagining being at your 80th birthday or something along those lines, and having all the people that you imagine you would want there, right? And what would you want them to say about your life? What would you want them to say about how you made them feel, about what you meant to them? If you could have them say whatever you wanted them to say, right? And so it's a way of getting in touch with, wow, when I look back on my life, what do I want to have been up to? What do I want to be about, right? And so it's an opportunity to clarify some of those things for ourselves. Any questions right now? Any thoughts? Is this registering with folks?
This is kind of like a weird thing, but I know for me personally, like I deal with some days, how the heck do I describe it? There is no meaning or purpose for me, I guess. I just have like one of those days where it's like, getting out of bed. So I guess it's just one of the side effects of, military life, I guess. So kind of like taking that into factor with something like this is kind of like, it makes us, I guess, like a interesting demographic of personnel to deal with, because it's like compiling. So you have this, you're trying to find like meaning or whatever, but then I mean, there's some days where it's just like you just don't care, you stay in bed, or yeah, it's I just saw that and I was kind of like, well, what if it's just so happens that everything stacks on that one day?
Mm-hmm. No, totally. Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it. And that's going to happen. The ebbs and flows of life are real. I think about I think it's Odysseus, right, that encountered the sirens. Do y'all remember that story? The Greek, was coming back from war, I believe, and had a narrow passage and knew that he was going to encounter something difficult, something challenging, something threatening. And so what did he do? Well, he took action to identify like how he might navigate that in the future. And so if you remember the story, he actually had the folks on the ship tie him to the mast, right? And I'll often ask people like what will you tether yourself to on those days? It's not a matter of if, and this isn't speaking even to Patrick, this is all of us, right? Like, it's not a matter of if we have those days where meaning and purpose feels out of reach. It's when those days come, what will I cling to? What will I be tethered to? And I think that's why these exercises proactively, right? Like when we're in this space where we can reflect, where we can say, okay, wow, what do I want my life to be about? That's why they matter. And that's why it matters to be intentional about these things. I really appreciate it because that's so real, so common.
And I would add that any movement towards those values counts, right? That this is not a black and white path. This is not, I either was 100% living my value of hard work today and I got everything done on my to-do list. It might mean that today it was really hard for me to get stuff done, but because I value hard work, I did everything in my power and I got one thing done on my to-do list despite feeling so rough. And that's still movement towards that value, right? So this is truly a compassionate and nuanced way to approach this. Might seem a little radical, a little different from the way we're used to dealing with ourselves. Because Patrick, I think you really identified that it's not that these things don't matter on those off days. Sometimes it's just really hard to get going and be the person that you ideally see yourself to be, that you value yourself to be. And so that's why I really like that this is not, that not something to accomplish bullet that you have on here, Timothy, I think is really important. This is a movement towards, this is an ongoing process versus something that we have to kind of check off every day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. And just to kind of piggyback off that, the reason I like the compass metaphor, right, is that I can always reorient to north. Maybe I not only don't accomplish what I did, but I did the exact opposite. And I did something that I regret that moved me away from that value that I care about, right? Well, it turns out that north is north, even on those days, or even on the days when I miss the mark or miss that pathway. And so I can come back to that. And I love the word, Jen talked about it being compassionate. That's exactly what this is. It's a compassionate approach to saying, hey, how might I continually strive for this, knowing that I'll never fully attain, right? This idea of being the perfect hard worker. That doesn't exist. But I can always find my way back. So, yeah.
And once we have those values kind of clarified for ourselves and we have that direction laid out for us and whatever that direction looks like, then it kind of becomes, okay, what do I need to do to help get myself moving in those various directions, right? What are the kind of pragmatic day-to-day things that might help to accomplish this? And these next couple slides, are probably as concrete and specific as we're going to get here, trying to make these general and applying to all the different ways that you all are bringing to us today. But definitely feel free to chime in, ask, for additional details, additional, questions about this stuff. Okay. There are kind of four major categories that I want you all to think about when you're going into all of this tough stuff that we've identified. It's going to come up in the coming months and coming semesters. And the first thing is, don't go it alone, right? The reason that we emphasized how much everybody is going through this, the reason why it's so great to have, a community, a group here today to talk to this stuff about, you can all hear that you're struggling with this in different ways, is because we function best, we social humans, when we work as a part of a team, when we rely on each other for supports, even if we're the most, independent loner out there, personality wise, we still need to ask for help from time to time. That's how humans kind of developed the way we did. And it's not a shameful thing. It's actually a really helpful, and I always think of like a pretty savvy thing to realize, okay, what are the things, the tools, the resources, the people, like who are what are the things out here that I have access to that can help me navigate through this objectively challenging path that I'm on? And once you've identified those resources, right? And this, like I said, this can look like other people. This can look like, okay, you know, who in the student veteran office might be able to answer this question I have about my funding, or this question that I have about how to manage my time, or talk to this professor, right? Once you've identified where those are, go after them, and it's really never too soon, right? So I really emphasize early and often here, because we've all probably experienced a situation where we're kind of struggling, we're kind of try to do it ourselves, and we're still kind of struggling, but it's hard to ask for help. And the next thing we know, it's like the day before an assignment is due, we're ages behind on all of our work, we're feeling totally overwhelmed, and it feels like I can't even show face in class right now because I just feel like I've totally botched it, right? So I used to do some teaching myself back in the day, back in grad school, and I think I mentioned this in one of our presentations in the, you know, earlier in the year too, but the vast majority of the folks that you're going to encounter in your school and in your professional settings want you to succeed, right? They aren't trying to set anybody up for failure, because it doesn't reflect well on them either, right? Like, no, you know, if a teacher has a bunch of students fail their class, they've got administrators being like, hey, what gives? Like, what's going on? You know, they get scrutinized. They want to help you guys too. So it can be helpful to remember that these folks are all out here hoping that they can connect with you in this way. And the more you kind of communicate with that, the more you reach out to them, just the more of a network you'll have to help move things forward. I also really recommend finding, on more of a personal level, a buddy or a team, in a sense of like, these are my people who I can kind of rely on, who I can check in with. We might all be going through this together. This could be a classmate, this could be a family member, this could be, any supportive person in your life who recognizes that it's hard right now. Maybe they're going through it as well, and you can kind of talk each other up and say, okay, what do we need to accomplish, and can we support each other through that task? Right. And at its core, whenever that nagging anxiety comes up that says something's wrong with you, people are going to judge you if you ask for help, right? Remember that the odds are everyone else is kind of struggling with things too. They might not be struggling in the exact same ways that you are, but it's probably not a cakewalk for everyone, even if they, make it externally look like it is. And that can be a really helpful thing to tell yourself, to feel encouraged and motivated to do something about it, right? It's like the classic situation in a school example. If you're confused about what the teacher is saying, there are probably several other people in the class who are also confused and are just too shy to say something about it, but nobody says anything about it, so the teacher thinks everyone is good. Versus if one brave soul raises their hand and is like, hey, I didn't get that, could you repeat it? Then like a bunch of people chime in and are like, yeah, could you? Like, I didn't get it either, right? So remember that others might be waiting for that piece.
And Jen, if I can kind of do a little plug here for some of the services that we try to promote
Please.
on campus. Yeah.
Identify those resources.
Yeah. One of the most underutilized services that I think is so helpful for our vets is the disability services. They can be called all different names, but basically in-class accommodations. And I'm thinking more and more with everything going on, they'll be even more instrumental in situations, like you said, where maybe someone's having a really bad day and they're feeling really anxious. So they think, I'm not even going to bother going to classes because I won't be able to concentrate. But if they have accommodations and they can record that lecture with a smart pen or recording device, even if they're not fully paying attention, the recording device is gathering all the information. And I've heard from vets, they'll say, well, I went because I knew I could record the lecture and at least listen to it at home, right? Or if there's medical issues, people are going to have to be quarantining and maybe staying home because they have underlying conditions and they don't want to head to campus because of an outbreak. They might need those accommodations as well. So connecting with the right people at your campus to make sure that stuff is set up and you have those resources. I always say set them up early. If you don't need them, great. But if you need them, they're there, already in place for the semester.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Micaela. And yeah, those of you who are here probably already know that Micaela is an excellent resource and an excellent point person for this, but, spread the word to your fellow student veterans as well, that you guys have people in, each institution that school that you might be coming from, to help students, whether they're veterans or not, kind of navigate through this difficult time. And yeah, as soon as you can kind of get that set up, the better and more kind of seamless it'll be to tap into that as needed throughout the year. Okay. The next piece of this is more of the, how you're talking to yourself piece. And you see that I have this phrase on here that just says you've done hard things before. And this is one of my favorite things to say in life and in my therapy sessions when I work with people, is just this really basic reminder that all of us have gone through challenges and have somehow succeeded, right? We wouldn't be here if we had failed at every single thing we've ever done in our lives. And when we are facing new and unique challenges, right, we might, like I said earlier, we might not have the playbook for how to navigate it perfectly, but it can be really helpful to tell ourselves, remind ourselves that we have the basic skills to navigate challenges in general, right? And sometimes it's really helpful to articulate that or affirm that in yourself, right? I have done things that are challenging before. I do have perseverance. I do have the ability to ask for help. I do have a motivation and ambition to get better, to change things, to make a difference, right? All of these kind of innate pieces that will allow you to tackle new and different situations. And it's a good way to kind of pump yourself up when you're feeling full of the doubt that anxiety brings along with it. Because anxiety is always a little voice in your head being like, no, 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 everything is bad, you're bad, the world's bad, right? And so sometimes we have to very intentionally say, that's the anxiety talking. In fact, when I kind of take a look back at what I've done in my life, it turns out the anxiety doesn't really know what it's talking about. And I can say these other things to counteract that, right? But it's always helpful, and it's not instinctive to be so aware of those thoughts always, right? If that came intuitively, I think all therapists would be out of a job, because we don't instinctively say, hey, how am I talking to myself? Am I thinking about this in a helpful way, in an effective way? Or am I kind of getting in my own path to success with the way that I'm approaching this? So it's always helpful to take that step back, to think about your thinking and see if you can kind of redirect things in a more useful fashion. I also want to invite you all to take it a bit easy this year, right? You've heard me say self-compassion a few times throughout this presentation, and I really think that in situations where we have so much on our plates, where things are new and different, where things are a little bit scary, where things are a little unknown, and where, as Micaela kind of referenced, we might be doing that set shifting, right? Switching back and forth between all these different modes. It's really easy to get overwhelmed, easier than it might normally be under different circumstances, right? And even the most capable and most efficient people out in the world are going to struggle with this, because it's just more than usual. And so I would invite you, even if this is a little different from your normal style, to be kind of proactive and be kind of conservative when you're thinking about, okay, how am I going to structure my schedule? How much am I going to put on my plate, at least at first? Try to take it easy, because you are going to be experiencing more of what's called a cognitive load, right? Just the amount of things kind of weighing on your brain that you have to keep track of and pay attention to and adjust to. It's going to be more than usual. And nobody is at their most effective when they've got a really heavy cognitive load. So definitely allow more time to get stuff done, and see that as, kind of normal, similar to if you sprained your ankle. You're not going to expect to walk to class as quickly as you would if you have two, healthy and not in pain ankles, right? It's going to take a little, allow yourself more time to get there, right? Similarly here, right? We're all kind of working at a bit of a handicap. So we want to allow more time to get stuff done, and definitely take more breaks than normal, right? When overwhelmed, taking breaks, right? Even, every 15, 20 minutes, if you're working on like a homework assignment, if you're in class, maybe you need to, get up and go to the bathroom and then come back to kind of like reset the attention, things like that, to give ourselves a little bit of a break. We actually find that people are better able to absorb things, better able to focus when they give themselves a little breathing room that way. Okay. And finally, I invite you to approach situations rather than avoid them. So you may remember that when I was talking about the symptoms of anxiety, I mentioned avoidance as a pretty classic symptoms, where what that little anxiety voice tells us is we want to get as far away from these things as possible. You know, we step outside of our house, as one of you mentioned, and just feel so overwhelmed, you know, that we want to go right back inside. But it turns out when they've done the research on how this works in our bodies and in our brains, that our anxiety actually kind of only lasts for so long if we let it run its natural course. If we allow ourselves to stay in a situation, right, in a situation that is logically safe, even if it doesn't feel so safe to our brains, right? If we allow ourselves to stay in that situation for long enough, the intensity of that anxiety will come down. It might not completely go away, but it's very likely to decrease to a much more manageable level. And the more we do that in kind of gradual but steady ways, the more our brain kind of gets used to it, and the more our brain learns, you know what, I can do that, even though it feels challenging, even though it feels scary, even though my body has this strong reaction. It actually will kind of naturally subside over time, and I just kind of have to wait it out a little bit. And the more you do that, the less you have to wait it out, right? The faster that process goes. We call that exposure, right? Exposure therapy, when we're doing it with people who have full on anxiety disorders. But even in just day-to-day anxieties, that is a really effective technique to just kind of gradually get used to it. And you can do it all at once. You can push yourself into one big scary situation and get through it. But most people find it much more manageable if they kind of take it nice and easy, and one step at a time kind of say, okay, maybe I start by going to the grocery store during a time of day when there's not so many people. And eventually I'll get to, work up to a point where I'm able to go on like a Sunday afternoon when there's tons of people in the grocery store, right? But it's okay to kind of ease into these things. And when you're thinking about classes, right, you might kind of think about, maybe proportions of classes that are online versus face-to-face, smaller classes versus larger classes. This is why I mentioned maybe ease into some of the other kind of extracurricular pieces to give yourself that nice kind of gradual reentry. But it's so important to give it a try, even when it's feeling challenging. And if you're finding that you're in a moment where your body is having those really strong reactions, use an exercise to take the edge off of it, to help you stay in that situation for just a little bit longer, to tolerate it just a little bit more. This is super useful if you're in the middle of an important situation like a class, where you don't want to have to just like hightail it out of there and miss the rest of the lecture, right? So Timothy shared a really great kind of just check-in clouds in the sky experience exercise with us earlier. And there are lots and lots of different relaxation exercises, slow breathing, muscle relaxation, guided imagery, all sorts of things. I'll show you guys some apps to do that sort of stuff. But I do invite you to explore, figure out which of these are most helpful for you, and try to invite that into a regular practice, right? I sometimes, with the folks I work with, invite them to, once a day, no matter what, right? Just like a regular exercise, spend 5 minutes doing something that helps you to feel less stressed, and pay attention to how it impacts you. Pay attention to how you feel before and how you feel after. And then sometimes people find that a nice structured way to just turn the volume down on all of this a little bit. What thoughts or questions are people having about these strategies that we've been talking about?
It's me again. I know from like our previous conversations of like from the burnout session, I can pretty much attest to like taking it easy. It's probably one of the best things I've done in a while, is because like I'm so used to, driving on through it and like grinding. But I decided to take the summer off, and it just allowed me to kind of like, do something for myself, as opposed to doing all these different assignments and like, you know, running around like a chicken with my head cut off half the time. But it's having that decompression moment or like couple months, if you can afford it, obviously, has been like probably one of the better things for me. Like I can kind of just mellow out and kind of just it just gave me the opportunity to process things. So I mean, my meathead, I guess I'll talk about like, you know, overtraining. Like, you know, you can hit the gym every day, but sometimes it's beneficial to throw in like those rest days. That way
Yes.
you hit it even harder the next day. So you just gotta let yourself like recover a little bit. So taking a day off isn't necessarily a bad thing either.
Yeah. 100%. It's so much more sustainable in the long term if we pace ourselves, if we build in that rest. Because otherwise, yeah, we burn out, we get injured, you know, physically or, you know, kind of metaphorically, and it sets us further back. So I think that's an awesome metaphor for what we're doing here, right? We do need to build in those rest days. And whether that's, you know, 5-minute breaks here and there throughout a task, or taking, you know, a weekend off, a week off, a summer off, you know, here and there as we're able to really recharge.
I was thinking too that the gradual desensitization and exposure piece might be important, you know, for anyone listening to maybe go to campus now and drop something off, or just as opposed to making a virtual advising appointment, maybe do that in person or come to the veteran office and meet one of the veteran reps before everyone's back on campus, and
Yes.
maybe get acclimated to every school's doing it differently, but what's the process? Yeah, like I know at CCRI you have to do like a temperature check and masks are required, and there's certain doors are closed and locked and you can only go in certain exits and entrances. That's all different, right? It's not a huge deal, but if you're already anxious, it'd be good to maybe go and sort of see what is this going to look like when campus is open in the fall and more students are all around. Go early and do like a, you know, a couple of in-person things to get ready for that. I like that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic idea and a great example of doing a little bit of that exposure, that desensitization, and planning ahead, right? And hey, this would be a great example if you found that buddy, right? Take them with you, right? Maybe they're a good person to come with you when you do that campus visit, so that you're kind of navigating through things together. But yeah, that's, you know, as much as you can kind of anticipate these challenges, pace it out, set yourself up for success. All of those things are really going to pay off in terms of helping things go more smoothly and not feel like you're dealing with all the challenges all at once in a big heap.
It's just brilliant, actually. And in fact, what we'll encourage people to do at times in our work, right, is create an exposure hierarchy. Right. And so we're literally asking people to say, all right, what's the biggest thing? And then how do we take bites out of this? Right. And so exactly what Micaela suggested and what Jen kind of elaborated on, these are the types of things we would be encouraging people to do, is saying, all right, what am I willing to do to start to expose myself to this so that I gradually become desensitized to the stress of it.
Absolutely. Right. It's okay to start small with this stuff. Okay. And speaking of particular things you can kind of be doing on your own in a self-directed way, right? Of course, you know, I encourage you to reach out to other resources, to advisors, to folks like Micaela and Patrick, people who are in these, you know, kind of student veteran advising roles, to mental health professionals if you need it, right? Like all of those are fantastic resources. But if you want to start small, the things that I really recommend are a couple of these self-guided apps that the VA actually has developed. So those of you who, you know, may be familiar with some of the VA's mental health tools may already be aware of these, but for those of you who aren't, these are just two basic ones. The COVID Coach app that unsurprisingly they developed during the pandemic when we switched to telehealth. That's why it's called the COVID Coach. I will say that it doesn't directly address a ton of like details about COVID in particular, but it's really like a nice telehealth app and is meant to be this really self-directed way to give you exercises, stress management tools, little tips and insights on things. And I find it a really nice, you know, free pretty seamless app to kind of fiddle around with on your own time. And it can be really helpful to identify, okay, what are the things that work best for me? You can save things that you see in this little picture. Maybe it's small, but it says favorites over here, and you can kind of save some of the things that end up working well for you and create your own little toolbox, right on your phone to practice these things. There's also a mindfulness coach that has been around for a little bit longer that really builds on all of the principles that Timothy introduced, at the beginning of this. And if you want a refresher, or if you want to dive deeper into this stuff, or if you're even just looking for someone with a nice soothing voice to lead you through clouds in the sky or any other sort of meditation or exercise like that, that's all built into this app. It's really, both of these are great tools to have, and because they're developed by the VA, they are free for everyone. They aren't super veteran specific, so you also can feel free to share them with other people in your life who might benefit. But I always like to make folks aware of these. Great.
Great. Yeah. So just kind of wrapping up, and for the sake of time, I want to give some time for questions. We encourage you to take up this practice of curiosity. Where am I? What am I experiencing? What's going on for me? Know the signs. Know what to look for when you are in need of that resource or that support, and know who to reach out to. Getting clear about your values and what you want to be about, what you're going to cling to, right? Like we said, in those times when it is hard, not if, but when. And then certainly, like, starting to develop this like toolkit, right? These skills or the resources that that you can access in order to live out your life in a way that is meaningful to you. And so we're just really thankful again to have a conversation with you all. We're in your corner and rooting for you as we go through it as well. And so it's a funny thing like that. But thanks again for having us.